Thank you for joining us today. I'm Troy Grable, your host of the Teamalytics Leadership Live series. Each month, our goal is to break down a leadership behavior and have an expert in team and leadership coaching share their perspective on the month's topic. Today, I'm excited to have one of Teamalytics' Senior Vice Presidents of Coaching and Team Solutions, Mr. Chris Mahue, on the show. Uh, Building high performing teams is a passion Chris successfully leveraged in the demanding environmental industry. As a former company president, Chris led merger and acquisitions. He worked through divesting companies, has experience navigating the challenging environmental agency world, and has recruited and developed global leadership teams. Chris has participated in various company board of directors and is a former member of the business leadership team and executive affair committees. Chris lives in Louisiana, married to his hero, has three adult children, and an avid runner who likes to challenge himself with a full or a half marathon from time to time. But one of the coolest things I think Chris has in his back pocket is his love for cultivating grapevines and making wine. And Chris, I can't wait to have a glass of your wine with you sometime. Welcome and thank you for joining us, Chris.
Well, thanks, Troy. I'm super excited to be here. And I jokingly say I enjoy making wine. My wife enjoys drinking wine. So it's a very complimentary marriage.
That's great. That's great. Today, Chris and I will discuss how high performing teams leverage order and structure to thrive. Chris will explain the importance of nurturing these behaviors within teams, and we'll also explore the benefits organizations gain when they foster a balanced culture of structure. Chris will also share why investing in order and structure can amplify a team's impact and drive meaningful results for the organization. Chris, before we jump in though to our topic today, could you give our listeners a little bit more depth of your professional background? When did you first learn about Teamalytics and what brought you to Teamalytics?
Yeah, thanks, Troy. So I was first introduced to the team analytics process back in 2005, believe it or not. So we're going on a good 20 years of
Wow.
working with the process. But introductionally wise, when I first was introduced to the process, I was a client. So
Okay.
we brought the team analytics process through the team that I led, which was a direct reports of about 11 people. And then we had about 400 or so total in the organization, but we went about 175 deep when you think about different teams within the organization. And what I found just fascinating about the process was two parts. Number one, it was a very practical approach to leadership. Obviously there's a theoretical approach that you can always learn from books and tapes and podcasts, et cetera. But I felt this was more practical. You could put it into practice almost immediately once you were aware of certain behaviors of which ones were your strengths and which ones are those areas that we want to work on. So a very, very fun process. And then furthermore, I would say this too. I absolutely did fall in love with the process, and it certainly made me a more aware leader. And I say awareness, meaning what behaviors was I pretty good at, and what behaviors did I need to go to the gym and exercise a bit more?
Yeah.
And it led me down a path not only to become a better leader, but it also made me a better father, a better husband, a better friend, because now I'm interacting with people and understanding behaviors and what drives behaviors within individuals as well as within myself as a leader, and as importantly within teams. And how does that look from a team perspective?
Awesome. Well, let's jump in and dive into our subject today. And today, like I said, we're talking about how order and structure drive team success. So, first, Chris, could you explain what we mean by the need for order and what organizations face when they don't invest in balancing that need for order and structure?
Yeah. So we have literally a number of behaviors, and there's a total of 13 that we look at when we are working with organizations. The need for order, and we specifically put that need first because it's a preference for structure and planning. It's a desire, if you will. So it's the need for order that we're looking at. And as I said, it's the preference for structure, for planning. A person that typically scores higher on this particular scale, they're going to be more detail oriented. They're going to be list driven, meaning what's on my list and what am I going to accomplish that particular day. It's also a person that's going to look to plan for clarity. And that's a key word here. You know, when you think about detail orientation and processes, a person that scores higher in this behavior really strives in that space of clarity. And as this buzzword, I think Patrick Lencioni put it together, organizational clarity. You know, what is an organizational responsible for? What are the team members responsible for? And when you have clarity of expectations, clarity of objectives, you're tending to drive performance in a better direction, a more aligned direction. And that's all built around that need for order. So in the simplest terms, think about it from this perspective, Troy. What if an organization didn't have a plan, a strategical plan, or a tactical plan, or they were just going through the course of the day and their list was their email list, right? Or their email inbox.
Right.
You know, it's really not going to perform well from that perspective. And obviously, I'm giving two sides of the spectrum,
Right.
but we really want to have a good level of team members that have a strong preference for planning and strong preference for structure in this process. The final thing I'll say here, when you think about the balance, is that some leaders naturally migrate towards a more preferable way of process or process orientation. And then some leaders might migrate to the lower side of this scale, you know, in the 3 to 4 range, where they're going to be more flexible, more adaptable. And we want to be aware of how that plays out as well, because that's part of the balance, as you asked in your question, is do we want everyone to be super high in the scale? Absolutely not. And we certainly don't want everyone to be super low in the scale. That creates that complementary, cohesive team, as you will, if you will. So
Cool. One of the keys of being a great leader is that ability to build that cohesive, high
mhm,
performing team. Chris, you've personally invested, as you've shared,
mhm.
and you've led those teams. You've also observed and coached organizations who've invested in transforming their organization to becoming high performing. So, my question is what and how are the right ways to insert order and structure within your company?
Yeah, from a team perspective, Troy, I've had the ability through this organization to actually travel to 11 different countries throughout this world.
Wow.
And we're coaching teams on what is the best way to build a cohesive team and how do we create awareness around certain behaviors to ultimately drive results. And how I would like to answer this question is first by saying, in order to build a cohesive team, we absolutely have to start with the foundation of trust. You know, if the team members are not trusting each other, we're going to create silos. We're going to have divisions. People are going to not have each other's back. We're also going to have a situation where it's my department versus your department instead of our team driving the organization's overall success. So we want to start with that foundation of trust, which then drives, again, what I like to say is, and this is from different readings from different leadership gurus in this or this planet, frankly, is the ability to drive a foundation of trust with good, healthy conflict, high level of commitment, and that leads to accountability and ultimately results. And that's the pyramid from Pat Lencioni's work, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. So I'll start with that. Now, when you look at the need for order scale, the need for order scale is plugged in at almost every level. And I want to touch on that a little bit. So let's just pick one of these particular areas that he lists from a trust, conflict, commitment, accountability, results. Let's
Okay.
go to accountability. If I'm looking at a person that we're trying to hold accountable and we already have a good level of trust, we also have a good level of conflict where both voices were heard. So the person is committing, not necessarily agreeing, but committing to a plan of attack or a plan of action. That's where the need for order really strives, is saying, what is the who, what, and when? And again, it's planful, it's structured, it's organized. If I know who's responsible for the product, if I know what the scope of work of that product or that service is, and I have a clear due date, my likelihood of holding somebody or holding the team more accountable goes up. So again, that's what we're saying when we say need for order. It's not one specific area. It could be tied into all 5 of those areas when you think about a cohesive team.
Awesome. What I want to dig into that a little bit more with
Mhm.
you. when is it, when as a leader or as a team leader do you notice that you've put too much in place?
Yeah.
Like that has to happen, right? And
Oh,
how
absolutely.
do you
Absolutely.
how do you navigate through that if you got too much order or, in place?
Yeah, I'm smiling a bit. Have you looked at my 360 report? Hey, guilty. My need for order in my last round of 360s, and we practice what we teach people, obviously,
Yeah.
is a 9.1 on a scale of 10. So I have a high need for order. My preference for structure and order is stronger than most. So my tendency is to be overly planful, to
Mm,
overthink things, to over prepare, even at times. And that's where we need to be careful as leaders, because it might cause me to not take that educated risk. It might cause me to say, Chris, let's get that last piece of data before you run the actual activity. And again, now we're getting into a little analysis paralysis. Another point I would share with you, Troy, on this follow-up question is that behaviors rarely operate in an individual vacuum. And what I mean by that is because my need for order is so strong, it tends to offset or lower my need for variety and change.
mm,
So again, because I have a high need for order and I'm very planful, one of the things I need to be aware of is, am I too detailed? Am I too tactical? Am I not thinking about the big picture? A second thing I always check myself on is, am I focusing on what we call the highest and best? Meaning is, am I focusing on the priority item?
mm.
I have a high need for order, this is an interesting point. My tendency is just to follow a list.
Yeah.
I start at the top of the list and work my down, because that's how the order is supposed to work. That's why we rank things in order of 1 through 10, etc. So my list, I need to go back and say, Chris, what are the priorities? What's the highest and best use of your time? And I need to focus on that first versus getting the excitement of checking things off the list.
Yeah, and I'm the direct opposite of you. I'm the high variety and change type of personality where
Exactly.
order and structure sometimes just gets in the way of that. So
Yeah.
I've got the reverse work that I need to go to the gym on.
Yeah, and it's an interesting comment too when you think about this particular behavior. When we work with senior leaders, especially CEOs, we often say, if you don't score higher on this behavior, you can hire it. You can bring somebody in, but
Yeah,
we need the structure and the planfulness in the organization in order to create what we call, again, that organizational clarity.
yeah,
What's the alignment? What's the direction? And typically that CEO will generate vision or a high level strategy. Then you have a number of operators or activity folks that we call executors that are actually performing the work. We
mm,
want them to be a little stronger in that need for order to offset that leader that has a lower need for order in that situation. So,
that's great advice.
mhm,
Can you give our listeners an understanding of uh, what you've seen in organizations before they've started their transformation
mhm.
process and what you witnessed as they progress through that process to becoming more balanced with order and structure around their culture?
Yeah. I touched on this a little bit about bringing up that CEO that scores low. We actually have a client that I work with, actually a couple of clients, but one in particular I work with. And I've been working with this client, our team has for almost 7, 8 years now. And we've gone pretty deep in the organization, meaning a number of different teams within that group have been through our processes. But this particular CEO scored rather low on that need for order. It's in the 2 to 3 range.
Wow.
But this CEO is a very creative, very inventive leader that really has a ton of ideas. Now, because he scores low on that particular scale, those ideas may come fast and furiously, right? So we want to make sure that those good ideas are parceled out and identified
Mhm.
as something that can push the vision of the organization or push the vision of the strategic plan that this organization is striving for. So as this CEO continually generates ideas, we don't want the entire team just going in many different directions. We want the
Right.
team to stay focused, but as we bring a new opportunity or a new idea into play, does it marry with what the organization's vision and structural plan is from a strategic perspective? If it does, let's apply that. Let's bring another group in or another team in, or let's apply that information or that idea to the existing team to go forward. Otherwise, let's kind of stage it and see, are we going to do something else with that idea later on down the road? Another example that I love sharing from a client perspective is that there's another CEO that I work with that does have a lower need for order. And one of the first meetings, Troy, that we had together, this CEO was telling me, so I see what I need to work on. And he actually said, you know, that whole Outlook calendar stuff, it's not as important as I really think it should be, but you know, that's okay. I'll deal with it. So what we did with this particular leader is we literally went directly to their chief of staff or their admin assistant and said, where does this person fall on the need for order scale? Then we went to the CFO, the COO, and at the time we brought in the CIO, and we said, where do they fall on the need for order scale? So you had an incredibly good balanced team before our data represented the information. But what our data did was validate each person's ideas and thoughts. So when they're having a meeting, they may let the CEO go off on an idea, and then they would reel the CEO back in periodically and say, time out. We know your need for order is quite low. Let's bring it back into line so that way we can finish the topic or the activity that we have scheduled for this particular meeting. So they used it in a very comfortable, joking manner, but with a serious mindset that says, we can't get too distracted from the direction we're going. We have ideas and we have things that we need to perform against. When you score higher on that scale, your tendency is to have a high level of KPIs that you're tracking and performing against. When you score lower on that scale, you're just kind of meandering through that process, but you're the vision guy, you're the strategic guy, you're the high level thinker, if you will. So just a couple of different scenarios that we look for a balance of culture or a balance of the need for order, if you will.
Yeah. Well, that's a great example of like when you started off our conversation, that need for trust. You can't go into those conversations saying, hold on a second, we need to, press pause and reel this idea in a little bit. It really boils down to that relationship of trust, and then being able to have those healthy, candid conversations.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Let me take it a step further.
Yeah.
We've recently introduced some things through our team, kind of this concept of an elite team or an A team.
Yeah.
We're saying what makes up an elite team, or what makes up, quote unquote, that A team, that highest performing team. And what we're saying, and I'm talking about balance here, so how different things have to be balanced in order to have an A team or a high performing team, is we've taken some data and said, let's balance a person that has a strong relational capacity, meaning they're building relationships, which is a combination of, as you just said, a high level of trust, a good engagement, some fun involved, right? Because we're spending a lot of time with our colleagues. We want to have some fun and enjoyment. It's also some healthy conflict. And that's part of the trust that drives a healthy conflict. We need leaders to build relationships in these teams, because if we have no relationship, and I tell my boss, who might be a CEO, hey, I don't think you should do that, if there's no level of trust or the ability to have healthy conflict, I'm going to be perceived as overly aggressive versus somebody that has the right intentions. So on one axis, think about the vertical axis as being relational driven, or relationships, or a high level of relational capacity. On the horizontal axis, we put results, right? So if we're only results driven and we have no relationships, we might be perceived as overly aggressive. But if the flip is there, Troy, if we have a high level of relationships and we're not driving results, now we're just everyone's best friend, and we're just kind of going through this comfortable zone, where we're not producing what the organization needs to be done. So we have found through our data and our research with teams is that the highest performing teams have a good level of results coupled with a higher level of relational capacity, or building the relationship. So as we said, we can have those healthy debates in the time of crisis, or create some scenarios where we're pushing each other and stretching each other to make sure that we're driving the right level of results. So I just wanted to throw that in there, because I keep hearing the word balance here, and I'm saying there's a lot of things going on with balance. above and beyond just that need for order
Yeah.
scale. But clearly, you're getting the point that I'm making.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Thank you. Well, we're getting close to our time, so I like to end it with a couple rapid fire questions for our
Sure.
audience. What is your favorite leadership behavior or behaviors to coach?
Yeah. It's like saying, what's my favorite finger? I'm not sure which one to choose. But I would say this, I'm going to default to the one I coach the most
Okay.
is, again, a combination of the nurturing and the criticality scale. And
Mhm.
it goes back to that comment I made. High performing teams have a balance of results in relationships. High performing leaders have a good balance of nurturing and criticality, meaning they're building strong relationships and they're stretching people. They're setting higher expectations. They're putting standards on
Yeah.
the table to say, we're going to meet these standards. So that's what I love doing. But I also got to say this, need for order is a very, very close third if I'm counting all these behaviors, 1, 2, and 3. That need for order scale is something that I look at a lot for clarity, for preparation. Again, as I said earlier, from structure, from organizational performance, et cetera, et cetera.
Cool. What about your favorite productivity hack for leaders?
This is an easy one. I continually coach leaders on time management
Mm.
and what I like to call this process of let's audit your calendar. And it's a two-part process when I say audit your calendar. Number one, I'm asking the leader to say, what are some things on your calendar that is not your highest and best priority?
Mhm.
And then secondly, I'm saying, why aren't you adding time on your calendar to be thoughtful, to be reflective, to do actual work that doesn't include an email or a PowerPoint presentation, right? And we need to calendarize that. We need to put that on our calendar. So that time management of auditing your calendar is one of the biggest productivity hacks that I've worked for leaders. And is I can't think of a leader, Troy, that hadn't said, thank you for sharing that with me because it is so powerful in its program.
Yeah. I probably need to take an audit of my calendar too.
We all do periodically, my
Right.
friend. We all do.
What's the best leadership advice you ever been given?
Yeah, and it kind of ties to what I've been describing some of today. It's and I know it verbatim. It's distractions can be the ruin of great work.
Mm.
Distractions can ruin great work. And I often tell people we don't need more time, we need more focus
Mm.
on the highest priority items.
Yeah.
You know, I'll throw something else out there, a fun fact, and I've shared this with some clients that I work with. The word priority has a Latin root and it's prior, Prior. That's the Latin root of priority. And the Latin word literally means one or first.
Mm.
So think about that. The word was first identified in the 14th century. It wasn't until the 19th century that some MBA, and I can say that because I have an MBA, so I'll pick on us, invented the word priorities, plural.
Wow.
So now we're saying there's multiple firsts or multiple ones if we go back to the root cause. So when I work with leaders as far as productivity hacks and what I like to say is that let's think singular. Let's think priority. Let's never use the word priorities because again, by its original meaning, we're saying multiple firsts or multiple ones. So there you go.
I like that. Well, Chris, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for really giving us some great tips on how to, implement order and structure and what results or outcomes we can actually expect as leaders. And I love how you mentioned with order and structure, it helps really drive that organizational
Mhm.
clarity. There's nothing worse than not being on the same page in a team over here as your leadership team. So I love that organizational clarity. Hey,
Mhm.
we have one more month to the year, and we're super excited. Next month, we're going to have Colonel Steve Dwyer on the show next month. It's going to be a little bit earlier in the month due to the holiday, but we're really excited to have Steve on the show next month. And also, I will have a QR code if you're interested in just taking a look at the health of your team. We have this nice survey that you can take and see the results, and that's going to be expanded to offering that also to your team members, so you can see it holistically as everybody wants to weigh in on the health of their organization. Once again, Chris, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
My pleasure. Thanks, Troy.
Thank you.